With a savvy instructor, a computer can make some very spot-on predictions. I'm Mackenzi Oliver, and on this episode of Ready STEM Go, we're talking about mastering machine learning with Rohan Mirchandani. How are you, Rohan?
Hey Mackenzie, I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for joining us. So Rohan has started exploring opportunities in the tech space while he was studying computer and software engineering with an internship at Energex, where he was providing advice for how to transfer over their program servers and start updating them. So since graduating QT in 2018, Rohan has since progressed into creating some very exciting tech in the machine learning space across a spread of different areas with applied artificial intelligence in research and in production environments. Working remotely for Canva, still based in Brisbane, he is joined the global juggernaut of 20 million plus users of the web-based platform. So it's now used to create beautiful graphics and visual content. So Rohan uses his machine learning skills to guide users towards creating an even more high quality designs. So before we tuck into that, we'll start off the show with a little STEM story or STEM fact. Rohan, would you say that what you've brought with you is epic, inspiring, or crazy?
I think I'd have to go with crazy on this one. It's a pretty interesting fact, but it's a little bit scary, I'd say. So for those of you, I mean, everyone kind of knows Elon Musk these days. One of his companies that people don't know too much about is a company called OpenAI. And they've actually developed a machine learning model recently that lets people type out text descriptions. So, you might type out a cat on top of a clock, and the model will actually produce a high resolution image of a cat on top of a clock, completely from scratch, completely like generated from nothing. Which is super cool, very interesting to learn about in lots of applications. But it's a little bit scary, to think that a computer can now start creating images from scratch all on its own. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do with it in the future.
Certainly crazy. He definitely knows how to bring about the intrigue.
Yeah.
So yeah, machine learning. How did it even initially grab your attention?
Yeah, so I kind of got into this while I was at uni. I took a class in artificial intelligence in about my third year. So this would have been around 2018. And this was when like kind of machine learning and AI was kind of really starting to blow up. Before this time, places like Google and Facebook, companies with lots and lots of money were the main people working on this stuff. And everyone else used kind of older algorithms, which is what this class I did was primarily about. And so during that class, I learned a couple of things about this more cutting edge, up to date stuff being done at these big tech companies. And while I was learning about this, I was also kind of exploring a couple of different internship opportunities to get some more experience while I was also studying. And I spoke to some people at a company called Technology One, and kind of worked out a project for me to do where they were interested in building a voice recognition type chatbot, similar to something like Google Home or the Alexas that we're familiar with now. And the idea was to build a chatbot for kind of an office environment before all that stuff was out that would let you, book meetings, check your schedule, see what's going on around the office, things like that. So I worked on that project with a couple of other interns. We kind of all got together and worked on this together at the company's office for about six months. I was there for about a year actually, but this only took about 6 months of that. And while I was there, it was a really good opportunity for me to kind of like learn all those fundamentals, be able to like experiment and try out these things in a pretty safe environment where I had like good context and like motivation to actually work on this stuff. I was building a product for a company that people were going to use, which is always exciting as a student. And yeah, that's where I learned all the kind of like baseline stuff about deep learning and machine learning. And once that project kind of concluded, it had been, six months, and all the AI research had progressed even further. And there was all these other new applications of things being done. Stuff that we see now, things like self-driving cars, and, Shazam can recognize music. We have smart light bulbs that recognize the time of day, all that kind of stuff. And I thought that maybe I should take the opportunity to maybe move away from such a big company where I was kind of had a lot of support and Like there was structure in place to make sure that I was learning and progressing. And jump into a couple of smaller, more startup-y companies. I actually went on a trip to San Francisco with a company called Startup Catalyst to kind of learn more about the startup scene. And when I came back, I started working at a couple of different AI-based startups on different things. I did a video compression startup. I worked at a voice generation startup. And then eventually I settled at a company called Maxwell Plus for a while. I stayed on with them as a graduate. And we were working on image recognition and blood test analysis, AI to improve prostate cancer detection, which was really, really good work. Obviously very important and meaningful work that like allowed me to learn really advanced cutting edge tech, but also kind of, save some people's lives in at the same time, which was really, really good. And then, yeah, from there, I kind of hit the same point where I was like, there's even more exciting stuff to work on. And that kind of means I might need to go somewhere else. This time it was to, yeah, as you mentioned before, Canva, where their machine learning problems and stuff like that were so different, again, based on, their size, how international they were, how much data they had. And yeah, that presented a whole host of new problems that I'm working on now.
I guess fundamentally it was always machine learning, but seeing those different applications and seeing the growth in real time. But yeah, it definitely sounds like you've been able to kind of keep your eye on the game throughout that. What do you see perhaps some cool future applications for machine learning, or something that's happening at the moment that you really think is about to take off?
Yeah, so for me, like obviously the one on everyone's eyes at the moment is self-driving cars. They're really coming up big at the moment, and that's definitely an area I would love to work on in the future because there's so many machine learning systems going on inside a self-driving car. You've got computer vision to detect what's going on in front of the car. You have systems that map what's happening like on the sides and in areas not directly in front of the car. Then you have like route planning and like all kinds of other stuff involved that all kind of need to work together, which is a much more complicated machine learning system than just a single one. Aside from that, I think there's actually a lot of very interesting applications happening at the moment that are maybe a bit more discrete, like things that people don't really know about, but are being used to improve our lives a lot. One really interesting one for me is Google has an algorithm that they use for optimizing their data centers. So these data centers are these like gigantic monolithic underground structures with millions of computers, all hooked up to cooling and electricity. They need to be moved around based on heat to make sure things don't get too hot anywhere. They actually have a fully automated system that moves the server racks around and turns things on and off around the data center to kind of optimize how much electricity is being used, what servers need to be cooled, how can we move this server, which is producing heat, over here to keep these other servers warm, all kinds of stuff like that. Stuff that saves them like billions and billions of dollars, but none of us even realize it's going on behind the scenes, which I think is super cool. The last area that I find really interesting is kind of not necessarily, it's a subset of machine learning, typically called reinforcement learning, and that's in video games. So a lot of companies are using video games like StarCraft, Dota, Atari games, things like Mario, to train like really advanced models for situations where it's a bit too hard to train these things in the real world. So with a video game, you have like a full simulated video game world and environment, which you can use to collect data. You can think about like in a game of chess, for example, if you want to train an AI to play chess and you want it to learn from someone, you need it to play millions and millions of games of chess. But that's not always super easy to do and to collect data for and to like maintain consistency. But with like a chess video game, you can just simulate all the games, in parallel. Everything's going on inside the computer, everything's stored. And being able to make AIs that can play like games like chess and solve complex problems like, being able to play strategy games and things like this. If you can train a model to work really well in these simulated environments, the idea is that you can maybe take it out of the simulated environment and start using it in the real world, which has a lot of application, really cool stuff.
Yeah, like finding new ways to collect all that data to just keep, was it reinforcement learning? Just to keep boosting the systems? Learning.
Yeah, so there's systems where they keep doing things. They train a system and then it plays itself, and then the new version then plays the new version, and then like you just do it over and over and over again to reinforce whatever you're trying to teach it.
No, very cool application.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk a bit more about your work that you're doing at the moment at Canva. What's your team like? Who are you working with at the moment?
Yeah, so at the moment, I'm on the search and recommendations team at Canva, which is actually comprised of a lot of other data scientists. So, search and recommendations obviously play a big part in helping users find content that they might not necessarily know they want, suggesting things like, based on what you're designing, what could be the best possible photo that might fit with your theme? What kind of GIF might match the text? What kind of font is the best for this particular birthday card? We work on trying to be able to understand what's going on when someone's designing and help them design better by suggesting all these kinds of things, making the search really, really easy. And this is super important for us because I guess the big message of Canva is that we want to enable design for everyone, and that means helping people who really don't have any design skills to do these kinds of things. In regards to my team, so as I said, like search and recommendations is a big area of machine learning and data science. So I work with a lot of other people in a similar role to me. But to deliver kind of like an experience that lets us use these AI models like in a real environment that's being used by 20 million plus people from all over the globe, there's lots of other people involved. So we have a lot of data analysts who work to help us understand all the data that we have about what's being designed, how users are interacting with things, what's performing well, what's aesthetically pleasing. So they help us also now analyze like the experiments that we run and like what the results of those experiments can like what we can get out of that to help us improve the product. I also work with a relatively new field of software engineers who we call data engineers and infrastructure engineers. So these engineers typically work on like helping us manage all the data we have and getting it in the right place, making sure it's formatted properly, that everything's being collected right. And it kind of sounds like a bit of a small task, but when you consider, we have like billions of searches every day and results and designs and everything's got to be collected and organized, it turns into like a really big problem that it's not really tractable for people like me to work on all that kind of stuff as well as my normal work. So we have data engineers for that. And I also work with just a lot of software engineers, back-end software engineers, front-end software engineers who work on integrating our models into the product, making things look nice, making sure things are internationalized properly, that the performance is good, all that kind of stuff that you would expect from software engineering type roles. And I guess the other kind of crucial team member in something like a data science-based team is a product manager. So the product manager is kind of there to make sure that the team is aligned on what we're doing. Engineers and scientists in general tend to have a habit of wanting to do things their own way, building cool things for the sake of it. So our product manager, he helps us stay on track, make sure that our goals are aligned with the company. He liaises with the hundreds of other people that want our help, that want us to build things for them, to make sure that we don't have too much on our plate, that the right priorities are being focused on, that there are no blockers, things like that. Again, a task that like you kind of don't think about too much until you get to like scale and you realize that you really do need someone to help you with all this kind of stuff, or you just get overwhelmed.
Yeah, like the sheer size of the company as well must, like, as you said, just introduce all these new roles that people don't even think about, people are thinking about. So definitely that would present a new challenge to some of those perhaps smaller companies that you said you were working with.
Yeah, definitely. I guess one of the big ones, like on that note, is like internationalization. So Canva, obviously make design accessible to everyone does mean everyone, and that means everyone around the world. And joining Canva, I've realized that there's all these problems around. You can't just write your code or build your system for Australia and expect it to work. You kind of have to consider that they speak a different language in China with different characters, and that has implications for how they use search. In Saudi Arabia, they type right to left rather than left to right, which again changes how something like your search autocomplete might work. In Brazil, they might have not great internet in certain parts of the country, and that means that you can't design a system that is really resource intensive, because everyone might have not the fancy iPhones that a lot of us might have in countries like Australia and the US, and we need to build our systems in a way that also accommodate that. We actually have a whole team around internationalization that kind of help us consider all these different problems that, as you mentioned, like you would never really think about until you hit a problem at this scale.
Yeah, and like culturally, if I'm using it, like I see things that make sense and that makes sense for me. But yeah, like if I was in a different country, as you said, speaking a different language, like culturally, it must be so different for all these different people accessing the same resource.
Yeah, and it makes a big difference, I think, to wherever they are in the world, to like kind of feel represented and included in the product that they are using. It makes them want to use it more. We kind of help like push this kind of thing by making sure that we have content that is appropriate for particular countries, regional festivals and holidays. We try and make sure that our search results are ethnically and ethnically diverse, to make sure that all races and everyone around the world is represented in the search results. All kind of stuff like that plays a big part in like making people just like your product, I guess, like they feel good about it.
Excited to engage.
Yeah, and it's also good for us to kind of work on these things that for some people that they'll never really notice that it's being done, but like we want to make sure that we're doing things that are actually good for people. And that's one of the other good things about Canva is like there's obviously a strong like sense of making sure that we do the right thing, that we don't make algorithms that read your emails and sell your data or anything like that, which is kind of the dark side of all this machine learning.
Yeah, making beautiful designs though, that sounds like a pretty good way to go.
Yeah.
So that's nearly about all we have time for. But before I let you go, knowing what you know now, what's something you'd like to go back and maybe tell your younger self?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, obviously we all have lots of things we'd like to tell our younger selves.
Just one.
But just one. I think the biggest thing for me is probably when I was coming out of high school, when I was in my early years of uni and stuff like that, I was really focused on like my studies and my grades and things like that. And I probably neglected other aspects of being, a good, well-rounded person. I didn't engage a whole lot with like lots of social events and networking and sports and going on exchange and traveling and all that kind of stuff, because I was a bit too focused on studying. And now that I am where I am and I have got a chance to do more of that stuff, I really do realize the importance of like making sure that you do take advantage of all those opportunities, particularly at a place like university where you have time and you have space and like there's not too much to hold you back from like doing those things. A lot of it becomes harder once you graduate, and I do kind of wish I did a bit more of that while I had the opportunity, because I think a lot of that stuff has kind of built me into the type of person that is in the position that I am now, getting to do these cool things.
Yeah, definitely think that is a pretty good takeaway for a lot of our listeners as well. So yeah, that's all for this episode of Ready STEM Go. Thank you for listening, and thank you again, Rohan, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
No, make sure you subscribe to our channel and never miss an episode. Plus, make sure that you join our Facebook group, QUT STEM is for me, and keep up to date with events and resources that you can access. See you later.